Assalamu alaikum, let's explore this Islamic topic together. Hey, so, you wanna know about the Umayyad expansion and how it messed with the Byzantines and Sasanians? It's a huge deal in Islamic history. Actually, think of it like this. Before the Umayyads really took off, the world looked completely different. Picture this. You've got the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, still clinging to its former glory, but kind of worn down after centuries of wars and internal squabbles. Then you have the Sasanian Empire, the Persians, their longtime rivals, equally powerful, equally exhausted from decades of conflict. They'd been slugging it out for ages, a constant back and forth of conquests and counter-conquests. Think of them as two heavyweight boxing champions, both battered but still swinging. They'd weakened each other immensely, leaving both vulnerable. Enter the rapidly expanding Rashidun Caliphate, the first Islamic caliphate. It was founded after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. Think of it as a relatively new, incredibly energetic contender stepping into the ring. They were united by their faith, and fueled by a powerful sense of purpose. They quickly conquered much of the Arabian Peninsula, and then, boom, they started taking on both the Byzantines and the Sasanians. Now, the Rashidun Caliphate's expansion was already impressive, but the Umayyads took it to a whole other level. They were brilliant organizers and military strategists. They consolidated the newly conquered lands, implemented efficient systems of governance, and built a vast empire. Imagine going from a scrappy startup to a global mega corporation in a matter of decades. That's the scale of their achievement. The Umayyad expansion wasn't just about conquering territory. It was a seismic shift in the geopolitical landscape. The impact on the Byzantine-Sasanian relationship was profound. Suddenly, these two ancient rivals had a new, much more formidable enemy to deal with. Think of it as two boxers, tired and bruised, suddenly having a third, much fresher, and stronger opponent join the fight. The constant warfare drained their res. They were forced to divert armies and funds to fight the Umayyads, leaving them less able to fight each other. Their decades-long rivalry, which had defined the political map of the Middle East for centuries, was now overshadowed by this new force. It's not that they stopped fighting each other completely, but their conflicts became less about expansion and more about survival. From a religious perspective, it was a huge moment. The spread of Islam was intrinsically linked to this expansion. The Umayyads weren't just conquering land. They were establishing a new world order, Islamic principles. This dramatically changed the religious and cultural makeup of the region, leading to the conversion of many people. It wasn't always peaceful, of course, but it was undeniably a transformative period. Think about the impact of Christianity's spread across the Roman Empire. This was similar in its scale and impact, albeit happening much faster. The fall of the Sasanian Empire to the Umayyads in 651 CE was a watershed moment. It marked the end of a centuries-old Persian Empire and dramatically altered the political power dynamics. The Byzantines, while initially resisting the Umayyad advance with a lot of initial success, eventually found themselves facing a persistent and powerful threat on their eastern borders. They were forced to reallocate res to defend against the Umayyads, meaning less could be had on internal affairs or other threats. The Umayyad conquest wasn't just about military might. They established an incredibly efficient administrative system, which helped them manage their vast territories. They built infrastructure, established trade routes, and fostered economic growth within their empire. This, in turn, further contributed to the decline of both the Byzantine and Sasanian Empire. as the Umayyads' well-organized empire started to absorb the economic and human res of its predecessors. In essence, the Umayyad expansion completely reshaped the Middle East. It brought about the end of the long-standing Byzantine-Sasanian conflict, not necessarily by resolving it, but by rendering it secondary to a larger, more pressing threat. It led to a massive shift in religious and cultural dominance, and it established the foundations for a new era in Islamic history. It's a period filled with immense battles, stunning victories, and long-lasting consequences, a truly pivotal point in history. It's fascinating to study, even centuries later. So, what do you think? Want to dive deeper into a specific aspect? Hey, so, you want to hear about the crazy early days of the Umayyad Caliphate and how it totally shook things up between the Byzantines and the Sasanians? Buckle up, because a wild ride. Think of it like a massive geopolitical game of dominoes. And the Umayyads just slammed that first domino with incredible force. Before we dive in, a quick refresher. We're talking about the 7th century. Right? The Byzantine Empire, think Constantinople. Incredibly rich, powerful, but starting to feel its age, and the Sasanian Empire. Persia, a huge rival, equally powerful but also facing internal struggles. They'd been locked in this epic, centuries-long struggle for dominance in the Middle East, constantly fighting for territory and influence. Think of it like a never-ending, exhausting boxing match where neither side could quite land the knockout blow. Exhausted, both empires were vulnerable. Then, bam! Enter the Muslim Arab armies under the Umayyad Caliphate. It all started with the Prophet Muhammad's death in 632 CE. His followers, united by their new faith, Islam, were incredibly motivated, disciplined, and surprisingly effective military force. Think of it like a sudden, incredibly powerful storm hitting two already weary giants. The initial conquests weren't just about brute force, though that certainly played a part. It was also about a new ideology, a new political system, and surprisingly, opportunities for some conquered peoples. It offered a different kind of authority than the Byzantines and Sasanians had given for centuries. Many people, especially those who were oppressed under existing rule, saw the chance to improve their lives or simply escape from existing systems that held little appeal. The initial phase of the Umayyad expansion was breathtakingly swift. Imagine the shock waves. First, the Sasanian Empire, weakened by decades of warfare with the Byzantines and internal conflicts, fell surprisingly quickly. The Muslim armies, energized by their religious fervor and a shared goal, conquered vast swathes of Persian territory, culminating in the defeat of the Sasanian army at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah in 636 CE, a genuinely earth-shattering event. This win didn't just conquer land. It destroyed a centuries-old superpower. Now, the Byzantines, already stretched thin by their own battles with the Sasanians, suddenly found themselves facing a new, formidable enemy on their eastern flank. The loss of the Sasanians, their arch-rivals, dramatically altered the geopolitical landscape. It's like their longtime sparring partner suddenly vanished, leaving them facing a completely new, unpredictable opponent. The initial Byzantine reaction was cautious. They weren't ready for a major conflict on two fronts. They had their own internal issues to deal with. And honestly, after dealing with the Sasanians for so long, it was almost shocking to see them disappear so suddenly. But they soon realized the scale of the Umayyad threat. The Muslim armies began pushing westward, and the Byzantines found themselves fighting defensive wars on multiple fronts, their res stretched, their manpower strained. Think of it, The centuries-old rivalry between the Byzantines and the Sasanians, which had defined the political landscape for so long, was abruptly over. But it wasn't replaced by peace. Instead, it was replaced by a whole new dynamic. The Byzantines were now forced to confront the rapidly expanding Umayyad Caliphate, a power that dwarfed even the Sasanians in its speed of expansion and the scale of its ambition. This new enemy brought a new set of challenges and threats. The impact on Byzantine-Sasanian relations is interesting, because their conflict essentially ended not through a decisive victory for either side, but through the rise of a third power that completely reshaped the Middle East. It wasn't so much a shift in relations between Byzantium and Persia, but a complete erasure of the relationship as they knew it. The Sasanians were gone, replaced by a new empire with its own unique culture, political organization, and ambitions. The Byzantines were left reeling, fighting for survival against a new wave of conquest. It was a fundamental reshaping of the ancient world, a period of extraordinary upheaval, and the beginning of a very different kind of power dynamic in the Middle East. It's a fascinating story, and so much more to it than this. But hopefully, this gives you a sense of just how dramatically things changed in the early days of the Umayyad expansion. We could talk for hours about the religious, social, and economic changes too, but that's a conversation for another time. Hey, so you want to hear about the Umayyads and how they completely shook things up between the Byzantines and the Sasanian Persians? Buckle up, because a wild ride. We're talking about a period where the map of the Middle East got totally redrawn. Religions clashed, and ancient empire crumbled. Think of it like this. The Byzantines and the Sasanians, these two mega powers, had been slugging it out for centuries. They were basically the heavyweight champions of the ancient world, constantly wrestling for control of everything from Syria to Egypt to Mesopotamia. Think of it as a never-ending, incredibly expensive boxing match, with both sides battered but refusing to give up. They'd been trading blows, weakening each other with devastating wars that stretched on for decades, leaving both exhausted and vulnerable. Then, bam! The Umayyads arrive on the scene. They were this incredibly ambitious and rapidly expanding Muslim Arab empire, bursting out of the Arabian Peninsula like a wildfire. And they were incredibly effective. They were united by a shared faith, Islam, and a powerful belief in their cause. This gave them a cohesive fighting force unlike anything the Byzantines and Sasanians had seen before. It wasn't just about conquering territory. It was about spreading their religion and building a new, vast caliphate. Imagine how unsettling this must have been for both the Byzantines and the Sasanians. They'd been locked in their own brutal rivalry. And suddenly this completely new player enters the ring. A force that was both incredibly strong and possessed a fervent belief system. The initial impact was devastating for the Sasanians. The Umayyads, with their incredibly effective military tactics and superior mobility, conquered Persia with astonishing speed. The Sasanian Empire, already weakened by decades of war with the Byzantines, just crumbled. Think of it like a boxer who's already been taking a beating, then gets knocked out by a completely unexpected opponent. This happened within a couple of decades. It was a seismic event, a total game changer in the region. The fall of the Sasanian Empire, the longest-lasting Persian empire up to that point, was a truly monumental shift in world power. Now, this sudden change impacted the Byzantines in two major ways. First, it did their main rival, which initially seemed like a positive thing. They weren't facing a two-front war anymore. The endless pressure from the east had vanished. But this relief was short-lived. Secondly, and more importantly, the Umayyads now shared a massive border with the Byzantine Empire. The newly conquered Persian territories now belonged to the Umayyad Caliphate. And suddenly the Byzantines found themselves facing a new, incredibly powerful and ambitious neighbor. One that now controlled vast lands they'd once considered their own sphere of influence, or at least contested territory. They'd swapped one exhausting rivalry for another. And this new one posed its own set of challenges. The religious aspect also played a significant role. The Byzantines, of course, were Christian. The conflict was not only about territory but also about faith. The Umayyads' expansion brought Islam, a new religion, into direct conflict with Christianity in the Middle East. This led to intense religious and ideological clashes, further complicating the already complex political landscape. There were significant conversions to Islam, and these conversions further shifted the balance of power. Think of it as a religious and political earthquake, a massive upheaval that reshaped societies, beliefs, and identities. The Umayyad expansion wasn't just a military conquest. It was a cultural and religious revolution. It resulted in a significant mixing of cultures, creating a new dynamic in the region. Think about the impact on trade routes, the flow of goods, ideas, and people. Everything shifted, and it did so with a speed and ferocity that is still studied today. The conflict between the Umayyads and the Byzantines continued for decades, resulting in a series of wars and battles, a constant back and forth of gains and losses. Neither side could achieve a decisive victory. The wars were exhausting, draining res and manpower from both empires. It was a struggle that significantly shaped the history and development of both civilizations for centuries to come. The constant threat of war cast a long shadow over Byzantine society and shaped their strategy. It was a time of constant tension and uncertainty. So, in short, the Umayyad expansion fundamentally reshaped the political map, religious landscape, and cultural fabric of the Middle East. It ended the centuries-long rivalry between the Byzantines and the Sasanians. But in doing so, it created a new, equally intense rivalry. It was a period of immense change, upheaval, and conflict. A crucial turning point that left a lasting legacy on the world we know today. And that, my friend, is just the middle chapter. There's so much more to this story. But this gives you a good taste of the intensity and the impact. Hey, so, we've been talking about the crazy, whirlwind expansion of the Umayyad Caliphate, right? And how it completely upended the Middle East. Remember how the Byzantines and the Sasanians had been locked in this brutal, centuries-long struggle for dominance? Think of it like the ultimate geopolitical rivalry, think Yankees and Red Sox. But with way more bloodshed and religious fervor. Well, the rise of Islam, and particularly the Umayyad Caliphate, absolutely threw a wrench into that whole dynamic. It's like suddenly a third, massively powerful player bursts onto the scene and completely changes the game. The thing is, it wasn't just a military power grab. It was a whole new religious and cultural force, spreading like wildfire across the region. The Sasanians, the Persian Empire, took the brunt of the initial impact. Their long, exhausting war with the Byzantines had weakened them considerably. They were already battered and bruised, their res stretched thin. Then, bam! The Arab armies, fueled by religious zeal and a desire for conquest, hit them with everything they had. It was a series of devastating battles, think Yarmouk, Al-Qadisiyah, Nihawan. These names represent the shattering of the Persian Empire, not just militarily, but also culturally and religiously. The Zoroastrian faith, which had been central to Persian identity for centuries, started losing ground rapidly. It was the end of an era, the collapse of a powerful civilization that had held sway for centuries. Imagine the shock waves. It must have felt like the world was turning upside down. The Byzantines, on the other hand, although initially successful against early Muslim armies, were also massively impacted, albeit in a more indirect way. The loss of the Sasanian Empire, their longtime rivals, actually presented both opportunities and challenges. The immediate threat to their eastern borders was gone, at least for the moment. That's definitely a relief, less fighting, right? But then came a whole new threat. The Umayyads, now masters of the vast territories that had been Persian, had their sights set on Byzantium itself. Think of it as shifting from one heavyweight boxing match to another. With a completely different opponent. They started pushing westward, conquering Syria, Egypt, and North Africa, all territories that had once been part of the Byzantine Empire or heavily influenced by it. That meant a massive loss of territory, revenue, and manpower for Constantinople. The economic consequences were huge. They controlled vital trade routes, and their loss had a severe impact on Byzantine finances and influence. Suddenly, the Eastern Roman Empire faced a formidable new enemy, one that was incredibly ambitious and expanding at an astonishing rate. The impact of this on Byzantine-Sasanian relations. Well, it's a bit like asking what happened to the rivalry between the Yankees and Red Sox after both teams suddenly got taken over by the same owner. It's not a rivalry anymore. The Sasanian Empire was effectively gone. The conflict was over. There's no more jostling for power between them. That decades-long, brutal battle was replaced by a whole new struggle for Byzantium, one against the Umayyads. The balance of power had fundamentally shifted. Now, the Umayyad conquests didn't end smoothly. There were internal struggles, rebellions within the caliphate itself, and constant battles to solidify their control over such a vast and diverse empire. The early Umayyad caliphs were incredibly ambitious, but managing such a huge territory with diverse populations and cultures proved to be a monumental task. They faced challenges in administration, economics, and religious policy. But in terms of the Byzantine-Sasanian relationship, the story ends definitively. The Sasanian Empire is gone, absorbed into the expanding Islamic world. The Byzantine Empire, however, continued, though significantly weakened and facing a new, formidable enemy in the Umayyads. Their rivalry shifted, it evolved, but that ancient, weary contest between Rome and Persia was finally over, extinguished by the blazing rise of the Islamic Caliphate. It's a powerful reminder of how drastically global power dynamics can change. Almost overnight, sometimes due to events that at first seem completely unrelated. So, yeah. That's a whirlwind tour of how the Umayyad expansion concluded in relation to the Byzantine-Sasanian conflict. It's a complex story, full of drama, ambition, conquest, and ultimately, immense change. What a story, huh? Hey, so, you want to talk about the Umayyad expansion and how it messed with the Byzantines and Sasanians? Okay, buckle up. A wild ride. It's a huge part of Islamic history. And honestly, thinking about it now, it teaches us a lot. Even today, imagine this. You have two massive empires. The Byzantine Empire, think Constantinople. Incredibly rich, powerful, and steeped in centuries of Christian tradition, and the Sasanian Empire. Persia, equally impressive, with its own long history in Zoroastrian faith. These two giants had been locked in a brutal, on-again off-again war for centuries. Think of it like a really long, really intense rivalry between two heavyweight boxing champions. They'd exhaust themselves fighting each other, then regroup, and do it all over again. It was exhausting for everyone involved, including the people caught in the crossfire. Then, bam! The rise of Islam and the early Muslim conquests. The Rashidun Caliphate, the first caliphate, had already made some serious headway. But it's under the Umayyads that things really explode. These guys were incredibly ambitious, incredibly effective military strategists, and frankly, incredibly successful. They weren't just winning battles. They were conquering vast swathes of land, expanding the Islamic empire at an astonishing rate. This sudden, powerful new player completely changed the game for the Byzantines and Sasanians. Think of it like a third, even stronger heavyweight boxer stepping into the ring. Suddenly, neither of the original rivals had the energy or rest to continue their centuries-long brawl. They were both severely weakened by decades of fighting each other, and now they had to contend with this new force. The Sasanian Empire, already reeling from internal conflicts and years of warfare with the Byzantines, was the first to really feel the impact. The decisive battles of Al-Qadisiyah and Nihawand effectively shattered the Sasanian military power. Within a few decades, the empire that had once ruled over a vast territory crumbled. That's a pretty dramatic shift, right? A whole civilization, a powerful empire, gone. The Byzantines, while initially successful in repelling some early Muslim advances, found themselves fighting on multiple fronts. They were now facing a new, powerful enemy on their eastern border, draining their res and diverting their attention and manpower. This constant pressure meant they couldn't solely on their old rival. The long-standing Byzantine-Sasanian conflict, which had defined the region for centuries, was essentially rendered obsolete. The new kid on the block had stolen the show. So, what does this teach us today? Well, several things. I think, firstly, the importance of strategic foresight and adaptability. Both the Byzantines and Sasanians were caught off guard by the speed and effectiveness of the Umayyad expansion. They were so ed on their own rivalry that they didn't see the bigger picture until it was almost too late. Lesson learned. Don't get so locked into one conflict that you miss the emergence of a completely different and potentially more significant threat. Secondly, the profound impact of shifting power dynamics. The sudden rise of the Umayyad Caliphate drastically reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East and beyond. Alliances shifted, trade routes changed, and entire cultures were influenced by the spread of Islam. This shows us that history is never static. Power is always in flux. And empire, however powerful, are not invincible. Thirdly, the long-lasting consequences of conflict. The exhaustion of both the Byzantines and Sasanians as a result of their prolonged war weakened them, making them vulnerable to the Umayyads. It highlights how extended conflicts can cripple even the mightiest of nations, leaving them open to conquest and upheaval. This teaches us the importance of seeking peaceful resolutions to conflicts, even intense rivalries. Endless fighting only leads to exhaustion and vulnerability. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the story of the Umayyad expansion and its impact on Byzantine-Sasanian relations underscores the complex and often unpredictable nature of history. It's not a simple narrative of good guys versus bad guys. It's a story of ambition, strategic maneuvering, military might, cultural exchange, and the rise and fall of empire. By understanding this complex interplay, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the factors that shape world events. And maybe even avoid repeating past mistakes. It's a fascinating period of history, isn't it? Thinking about it really makes you consider how quickly things can change, how interconnected the world is, and the importance of understanding the past to navigate the present and future. It's a reminder that even the most powerful empire can crumble, and that new challenges and opportunities are always on the horizon. Goodbye, may Allah bless us all. That's our discussion for today.